With all the billions that have poured into these territories, the Gaza Strip and the so-called Palestinian territories, why are the people still suffering? Why are there still so many refugees? Because they want to blame the Jews and they want to blame Israel. Their bigger picture is, their long-term, if not short-term goal is to blow the Jews out, to obliterate them. We haven't spoken since the attack on the Jews in Israel. I'm calling this the Second Holocaust. People make references to the Holocaust. I understand 6 million Jews are not being slaughtered, but they want to slaughter 7 million Jews. That's the whole point of this. And the atrocities are just unspeakable. The inhumanity is unspeakable. And I know for sure that most of you watching this show aren't Jewish. But you know what happened in World War II when this country was attacked. And I want to remind you what Eisenhower, Patton, Omar Bradley, and they took a tour, I think it was of Auschwitz, after it was liberated. Eisenhower said, "My God, I didn't realize there was so much evil in the world." That man had seen everything. A couple of the generals were stoic, but were crying with the tears rolling down their cheeks. The ovens, the mass graves, the people that they liberated, grown men who were 75 pounds, 80 pounds, not a piece of fat on their body, not a muscle, all skin and bones, ready to die. The brutalization of the children and the women, the unspeakable things that have taken place or took place. You probably saw the black and white films after the fact. And I have really been the only conservative voice in America now for years that have pointed out that our media covered this up. It's a full chapter in Unfreedom of the Press. What the New York Times did is unspeakable. They were informed about what was taking place, but they wouldn't report it. For several reasons, but including the fact that Franklin Roosevelt didn't want all the information to get out. The foreign press, particularly the British, couldn't believe it. And I predict, and it's already happening, that the American press will start to turn on the Jews once they defend themselves, because Netanyahu is not going to let this stand. He is not going to let this stand. And all parties in Israel are united to blow out Hamas, except, of course, the Arab parties, which are still part of the government in the Knesset, just so you know. How many of you have heard of Amin Alhusani? Probably none of you, because these short history lessons you're getting on TV really aren't history lessons. He was the Palestinian Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. I've talked about this on my radio several times, my radio show. He was sort of the iconic figure to Arafat. And his terrorism really is the foundation for the terrorism that we see today. You know, the Jews have lived in Judea Samaria, what we now call Israel, for 4,000 years. It's in the Bible. Palestinians are not in the Bible for a reason. They weren't there. And even today, despite the fact that I mention it on this platform, on radio, on Fox, everywhere I go, there's no such thing as the West Bank. The West Bank of Jordan, Jordan captured Judea and Samaria in the 1948 war to try and destroy the Jews and push them out of what we now call Israel. So this so-called West Bank goes back to 1948. It's propaganda that's been used by the Arabs and the Jordanians. But you can check out your Bible. It's called Judea and Samaria. And the reason Judea and Jew sound familiar is because that's where Judaism began. You should look up the town of Shiloh, which existed long before Jerusalem, as did the city of David. The history is remarkable, the ancient history. So these little snippets of history you're getting start with 1948, or maybe a few decades earlier. That's not the history of the region. That's not the history of the Jewish people, which extends much further back. So they are the only indigenous peoples who are not recognized as indigenous peoples by many of the same Marxist movements in the United States and throughout the world who attack, quote unquote, white people for conquering all sorts of people. Amin Alhusani, the Palestinian Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, met with Adolf Hitler and met with his lieutenants and generals often. And he offered to help the Third Reich slaughter Jews in the Middle East. And he contributed 5,000 men to the Third Reich army. And notice that name, those words, have never been said on TV. They're not said on TV now, except by me on Fox the other day. And yet, everybody keeps using the West Bank, ignoring who this man was. The history of the so-called Palestinian people, who were never the Palestinian people, they're Arabs. So they called themselves the Palestinian people because it sounds like Palestine, like they've always been in Palestine. That is what today is mostly considered Israel proper. But this is a bigger issue. How many Christians remain in Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus? Not that long ago, Bethlehem was a majority Christian. It's now part of the quote-unquote Palestinian Authority territories. The Christian birthplace of Jesus. How did that become Palestinian territory? Christians used to represent about 68% of the population in Bethlehem. Now, so-called Palestinians represent 68% of the population in Bethlehem. You look at Jericho. Jericho is 100% controlled now by the Palestinian Authority. Jericho's in the Bible too, isn't it? Who used to live in Jericho? The Jews, and later the Christians and the Jews. There aren't any more Jews there and there aren't any more Christians there. You can look all over this area and see what's taking place. In the elementary schools, really the nursery schools and beyond, the Palestinians are taught the Jews are not human beings. They're taught that they kill, dismember, and cannibalize Palestinian babies and so forth. The most horrendous kind of indoctrination and propaganda at the earliest ages. And what are these groups? Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood. What's the Muslim Brotherhood? It was given birth in Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood supported the attack on the United States on 9/11. In fact, they were involved in it. The Muslim Brotherhood assassinated Sadat because he was a tremendous statesman. He and Begin of Israel, the prime minister, had this historic peace deal where the Jews gave the Sinai Peninsula back to the Egyptians after they captured it, and other areas back, and they've had relations ever since. Not that they're best buddies, but they're very close on intelligence and so forth because they have a common enemy in Iran. But Egypt is not, at this point, a military threat of any kind to Israel. And the Muslim Brotherhood actually elected a president over there who started rounding up Christians, who Obama supported, and Sisi, who was a top military general, overthrew him. And thank God he did. And again, Obama, Biden, and the Democrat Party in our country objected. Pretty sick. So Al-Husseini was a Nazi. So I give you the very slightest of context so you can understand what's taking place here. The Hamas terrorists are quote-unquote Palestinian, and the Palestinian Authority, Abbas, has been the dictator there, really, almost forever, Palestinian as well. With all the billions that have poured into these territories, the Gaza Strip and the so-called Palestinian territories, why are the people still suffering? Why are there still so many refugees? Because they want to blame the Jews, and they want to blame Israel. Their bigger picture is, their long-term, if not short-term goal is to blow the Jews out, to obliterate them, to mass kill them, genocide. That's their objective. That's why you see the atrocities today. But the truth is, Abbas is a very, very wealthy man. He has vacation homes all over the Middle East and all over the world. He controls every penny that comes in there. They run it like the mob. They divide their economy into sectors. He puts family members in charge of the sectors, or his closest friends or political allies in charge of the sectors, and they rule over the economy and they rule over these towns like butchers. Brutal. And as long as they can keep indoctrinating and brainwashing the children, who become, in many cases, terrorists, and focus their fire on the Jews in Israel, they can continue to line their pockets. As long as they can keep refugees, Palestinian refugees, in the situation they live in, they can use the UN, the European Union, the Democrat Party in our own country to keep funneling hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to that corrupt regime, which enriches itself. In the case of Hamas, Hamas is a branch of one of the most vicious terrorist organizations on the face of the earth. And that terrorist organization has killed many Americans, has committed many acts of terrorism against Americans. And now they have joined with Iran, or Iran has basically funneled enormous resources into Hamas. They say into the Gaza Strip. It's into Hamas. And Hamas has been turned into a militia wing of the Iranian Republican Guard. And 70% of that economy over there is now funded by Iran, so they own it.
Want to see more? Sign up for Levin TV.